join the presentation as they arrive. In behalf of the Roseville Library and the League of Women Voters of Roseville area, I welcome you tonight. My name is Bonnie Cook. I am this year's program chair for the League. Our local league actually represents Falcon Heights, Lauderdale, Little Canada, Maplewood, and Roseville. So we're hoping to have people from all of those areas in attendance tonight. Our mission statement says that the League of Women Voters is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. It is open to both men and women. Our mission is to encourage informed and active participation in government and influence public policy through education and advocacy. Tonight's event is an opportunity to become better informed voters by learning about a subject that is probably near and dear to many in this room who have experienced or anticipating caregiving for someone close to them. Legislative advocacy has been in the headlines as groups have come together to pass bills that will protect vulnerable Minnesotans and assist their families in providing quality care. Both of our speakers tonight have personal experience in dealing with elder care system for a family member. JacLynn Herron, who is at my left here and will be speaking first, is an advocate who does work with Elder Voice and is also the author of Singing Solo, In Search of a Voice for Mom, which is her family's elder care story. On the table when you came in, you can find a connection to her website if you would like more information. Jean Peters, who at the moment is in the back and will be speaking, waving her hand, will be speaking soon, is the Vice President of Elder Voice Family Associates, where she educates and empowers families to ensure that their family members receive safe homes and long-term care. In that function, she received the prestigious AARP Andrus Award, honoring her community service to enrich the lives of others. Prior to becoming a part of Elder Voice, she worked in multiple health settings as a forensic nurse and nurse practitioner. She is currently the owner of ElderCamNurse. Let's welcome both of them tonight.
Good evening. Well, a pleasure to be here tonight. I so would like to thank the League of Women Voters, Roseville area, as well as the Ramsey Library here in Roseville, to offer an opportunity for us, Jean, and for me to speak on a very important topic, elder abuse. I'll lead off tonight by sharing my mother's long-term care experience, and it reveals some of the systemic problems that we have that enable abuse and neglect to occur. I'll also reflect on the 2018 legislative session, and then Jean will follow with her own experiences and insights, along with a status report on what's happening this year in elder abuse legislation. So let me begin by telling you a little bit about my book. Singing Solo is a memoir. Singing Solo, In Search of a Voice for Mom. It's about losing a mother to dementia. It's also about advocating for my mother as she proceeded through a continuum of elder care that involved assisted living, memory care, and finally nursing home care. Mom suffered from vascular dementia. She became wheelchair bound, unable to speak, and a resident of a Twin Cities nursing home. She was private pay for the last 3 years and 8 months of her life. To quickly and concisely introduce you to her nursing home experience, I'd like to read just a small piece from my book. It's in the prologue. It actually was written in the year 2009. My mother died in 2006. But I returned to the nursing home grounds and I reflect on the situation that my mother had lived when she was within that nursing home. Dementia stole my mother's voice, and sadly, a well-reputed nursing home became an unwitting accomplice. On many warm days, I retrieved Mom from her room in the red brick nursing home. bundled her up if the weather dictated, and pushed her in her wheelchair along an outdoor asphalt path. On a short 10-minute journey, we could circle a small pond, unless we stopped en route to enjoy the scene, which we often did. Unable to speak, Mom enjoyed the rhythmic cadence of the fountain in the center of the pond, and I enjoyed a break from carrying on one-way conversations, sugar-coated with fake perkiness, a dismal attempt to mask my sadness at her condition. Some days I brought cheeseburgers, and we picnicked at the park bench on the water's edge and pretended life was normal. We laughed at the ducks, especially a domestic white one that somehow took up residence with the mallards and their offspring. Like the Pied Piper of the aquatic community, she led the flotilla in small parades around the edge of the pond. Unable to fly south for the winter with her winged comrades, each autumn she was captured and relocated to a warm, safe hobby farm until spring, when her caretakers returned her to the pond. Did Mom feel captured and relocated as well? After strokes and dementia rendered her totally helpless, I received firm direction from the authorities that operated the care system. They said it was time to move my mother to the next level of care, away from her friends in an assisted living community designed for people with memory loss. Her next and last home would offer a level of care better matched to her needs, I was told. Mom trusted me to make the right decision. I trusted those in charge. I dutifully followed the guidelines and moved her to a well-regarded nursing home for the last 3 years and 8 months of her life. Was this move a mistake? How often I pondered that question as I pulled into the parking space alongside the pond. Daily I arrived to feed Mom her noontime meal. Although strokes and dementia had robbed her of her ability to talk, walk, reason, and care for herself, her medical condition declined in a very slow, undetectable rate. In comparison, the care she received in the nursing home fluctuated wildly, from wonderfully compassionate to unacceptable, from competent to downright neglectful, depending upon the day's circumstances. As I walked back to my car at the end of each visit, my gut responded according to the experiences of the day. On Mom's good days, when overworked and underpaid nursing assistants took extra moments to bring her comfort and care, I offered prayers of thanks as I strolled along the pond. Sparkling geysers from the fountain, in tandem with the compassion offered within the red brick walls, eased my worry. On bad days, when understaffing and/or incompetence tainted my mother's care, I cursed the fountain as I passed it by. On those days it was a sham, a misrepresentation of calm, standing in stark contrast to the chaos and the neglect that operated inside the building. And on ugly days, after a poison pen letter was added to my mother's laundry, or an engagement ring disappeared from her finger, the fountain became a fake. No longer a symbol of home, I looked upon it as a lowly aerator whose sole job was to keep algae under control, just like administrators who offered lip service to the family to keep dissatisfaction and fear at bay. Now, 3 years later, I ponder the fate of the domestic white duck. Had it survived the yearly relocations, or did it pass on, just like Mom and 13 of her floor mates during the winter of 2006? Have conditions improved for current nursing home residents, especially those rendered voiceless from dementia? What are their stories? Who will tell them? Will anyone listen? I'd like to thank you tonight for listening to my mom's story. Her name is Teen. It was short for Ernestine. She graduated with a class in 1939 from Hamline University. She became an English teacher and eventually retired from the White Bear Lake school system as a reading specialist. She married her high school and college sweetheart, my father, and together they raised a family of 2 children and eventually welcomed 3 grandchildren. before losing their son, Jim, my brother, to a brain tumor at the age of 45. This left me, the surviving child, to help them as they aged. Luckily, I was not alone. Their support team also included my husband, Tom, our adult daughters, Krista and Angie, and my nephew, Clay. And they needed that support. Because in 1998, my father's physical ailments and my mother's memory issues kind of imploded. Independent living was no longer an option for them. So we helped them secure an apartment in a relatively new housing option for the time, assisted living. Their building was run by a nonprofit corporation that offered a continuum of care. By that I mean that memory care and nursing home care was also available if they needed it. My goal was to keep my parents together for as long as I possibly could. When Dad died, which is about 2 years later, we moved Mom next door to memory care when it became clear that she needed more supervision and more oversight and assistance. And it was during that time that I learned what they mean when they say, if you've met one person with dementia, you have met one person. Because the care that they need is so unique for each one of them, requiring individualized, or the term person-centered care. And that's what my mother received in this particular place. But as my reading described, once Mom was given the designation of end-stage dementia, I was directed to move her to the nursing home. That meant that I could teach at Irondale High School in the morning, I could jump in my car, and I could get to the nursing home in time to feed my mother dinner, which was the largest meal of the day, but it was served at noontime. And it was very important for me to feed my mother, because if there was one thing that dementia had not stolen from her, it was her appetite. And she enjoyed food, but she could no longer navigate a forkful of it from her plate to her mouth. Someone had to feed her. So that became my daily routine. And then at night, before I went to bed, I'd open up my computer to a file I had there entitled My Mother's Nursing Home Journal. And I recorded my mother's daily situation. Unfortunately, I was also documenting the loss of person-centered care. For example, for weeks I arrived to find my mother in the day room. And more often than not, I'd find her lisping. She had a right side weakness because of a stroke, and her body would go to the side. Her arm would fall off, pulling her even further. And I'd arrive and I'd see her this way, and she'd have this grimace on her face. So I'd stop someone, and I guess maybe this is what was so distressing. Everybody was just walking right on by and not seeing her this way. But I'd stop someone and I'd say, will you help me reposition my mother? And so we'd go over and we'd each take a side and we'd lift her up and we'd square her hips and we'd set her back down again, and she'd rest back into her wheelchair and a smile would come onto her face. And I would think, it took 30 seconds to improve my mother's quality of life. But nobody seemed to have it, and nobody seemed to notice. It was disconcerting. My request for repositioning became so commonplace that eventually all it did for me to get my mother repositioned was to step off the elevator. People would notice I was there, they'd scan the room for my mother, they'd go over, they'd reposition her before I got there. And I'd say, thanks. But I was left with a couple of questions. What would have happened if I hadn't gotten off the elevator? And what about the other 50+ people that never have a daily visitor at all? So I kept journaling. And after a while, this is what I learned. I learned that Mom thrived when compassionate caregivers treated her with dignity and gentleness. And there were many compassionate caregivers in my mother's nursing home. But I also witnessed many difficult days when her quality of life was negatively impacted by inconsistency of care from one shift of caregivers to the next, failures to implement her care plan when she wasn't fed, when she wasn't repositioned, when she wasn't given the fluids that were so critical to the one medical issue she had besides dementia, which was reoccurring urinary tract infections. There were injuries resulting from her cares. But what was worse, then there was failure in protocol to take care of those injuries. There were concerns regarding my mother's personal safety. I mentioned the poison pen letter. That was threatening. And there were issues involving the security of her belongings. Many things disappeared. Most heartbreaking was that engagement ring with her finger. I learned that person-centered care does not thrive in a facility that's marred by understaffing and high staff turnover. I wondered how my mother's aide could be expected to get up and out for breakfast 10 residents by 9 o'clock in the morning. And my mother was one of them, who needed 100% of her cares taken care of by that particular person. I learned that understaffed weekends and holidays can be especially scary times for nursing home residents. And when other families expressed concerns that their loved ones were waiting for such long, long times for their call lights to be answered, I thought about my mother. She couldn't depress a call button at all. Somebody had to remember her. I learned that not every person is skilled in dementia care. I watched Mom relax in the care of some people and tense up to the point of being rigid in the care of others. What I grew to fully understand is that people with dementia, like Mom, who cannot speak, who cannot ask for anything, who cannot report, are extremely vulnerable, and they're in need of advocates. I was thankful when Mom's hospice team arrived. They were from an outside agency that in no way was beholden to the nursing home. They offered my mother person-centered care. After she died, we buried her ashes and we celebrated her life, and life went on. What I had trouble leaving behind, however, was my nursing home journal. Within its pages were example after example of how understaffing, high staff turnover, and the resulting burnout and blindness negatively impacted my mother's quality of life. Well, I've always believed in the power of story, so I started to write about my mother's long-term care experience. Now, her story is not a case study of one horrific example of abuse. Rather, it's about life as usual in a long-term care facility for a vulnerable adult. And this should give us pause. It speaks to the needs for systemic reform. Because when facilities are understaffed, when oversight is lacking, when residents cannot report, our elder care system is ripe for abuse and neglect to occur. Eventually, with the help of the people at the Loft Literary Center in Minneapolis, I crafted a memoir. But it had taken me 4 years. Mom had died in 2006, it was now 2010, and I thought, you know, maybe this story is outdated. Maybe things have gotten better. So I decided I needed to find out. So Tom and I jumped into our car, and we drove down to the University of Minnesota School of Public Health, and we sat down with Dr. Robert Kane. Now, Dr. Kane is also the director of the Center on Aging, and the author of a book entitled, "It Shouldn't Be This Way, The Failure of Long-Term Care." He'd written that book with his sister after his experience with his mother. No, long-term care has not improved, he told us. In fact, things have gotten worse, and they're going to continue to get worse. Why? Because of our aging population. We keep talking about that great tsunami, the baby boomers that are all getting old and needy. He encouraged me. He offered to read my manuscript, and then he offered to write a blurb for the back of my book, which he did. I really appreciated that. He died in 2017, and vulnerable adults lost a really very tireless, special, great advocate. So once my book was published, then I took my story to any place that would be willing to let me tell it. So book groups, bookstores, libraries, churches. I talked to senior groups. I talked at dementia conferences. I wanted people to realize they can't just leave their loved ones in long-term care and assume everything is going to be fine if things are spelled out in the care plan. What I found out, though, is people that were coming to hear me speak, many of them were living the same story. They got it. And many of them, like me, were feeling alone and isolated. Part of the reason for the title of my book, Singing Solo. It's a very lonely place. As they tried to advocate for their parents or their loved ones in a care system that seemed antiquated and outdated. Then I went to dementia conferences and shared my mother's story with those whose job it was to deliver the care, the nurses, the nursing assistants. And I feared they might be offended by my story. But soon I realized they totally understood. And why wouldn't they? They were living the experience too, as people whose work environment was plagued by understaffing and high staff turnover. The same realities that had negatively impacted Mom. During the Q&A with them, I listened as they shared their concerns about working in facilities where understaffing created high levels of stress, to the point where conscientious people said I had to leave because I couldn't do things the way I thought they should be done. They expressed regret. They expressed guilt that they were unable to provide the care for these people that they loved dearly, the care that they needed, the care that they had been promised, and the care that they were paying for. During a 60-minute presentation, I really detailed the story at the Caring for Person with Memory Loss conference. And I remember a woman in the audience, I believe she was a social worker from a nursing home, and she said to me during the Q&A, "You should tell this story to the state legislature." And I heard this kind of a buzz of agreement, and I thought, I would love to tell that story to policymakers and to purse string holders. But how does that happen? And would they listen? And if you recall, that was the last question that I asked in my first reading. I stopped before the final paragraph. I'd like to read that last paragraph now, and I think it's kind of prophetic. Optimistically, I shut my eyes and imagined the din, muted at first and then louder and louder. Trampling feet arriving at the doors of nursing homes everywhere, in crowds too huge to be ignored, expecting the best, outraged at the reality, unwilling to be placated, demanding a new model for elder care, voices for change, a full choir at last. They are coming, thank heavens they are coming. I was hoping, but I can tell you now they have come. Voices for change have arrived, and they're growing stronger in number and in strength. And there are people like Jane, who's going to be talking in a minute, and her sister Kay, and she's got a story for you. Strong voices for change. There are people like Chris Sears, Minneapolis Star Tribune reporter, who in 2017 wrote a 5-part expose entitled "Left to Suffer: How Minnesota Ignores Elder Abuse." The series was about long-term care facilities. And I appreciate him, and I appreciate Paul Walsh, which is another one, another reporter, because they're talking about elder abuse, and they're getting it out there for us to see. They're becoming voices for people like my mother, who could never speak about this. Then along came Scott Dibble. Well, he's been around a long time, but he was another voice for change in this regard when he called for an audit, a legislative audit of the Office of Health Facilities Complaints. That's the Elder Abuse Watchdog Agency in the Department of Health. Then along came the state auditors. And what did they find? You probably read about it. Dysfunction and over 20,000 unresolved complaints. And 400 plus more arriving every single week. At the end of 2017, Great Voices for Change came together. The Consumer Coalition, Alzheimer's Association, AARP, Elder Voice Family Advocates, Legal Aid, Minnesota Elder Justice Center. The governor pulled together this task force and they came up with recommendations in 4 action areas: strengthening and expanding the rights of vulnerable adults and their families, enhancing criminal and civil remedies for vulnerable adults, requiring assisted living licensure and dementia care standards. And it's important to note we're the only state without assisted living licensure. And demanding improvements to Minnesota's Department of Health. Now, soon legislators were crafting and signing on to these. Remember, I'm talking about 2018 legislative session. These bills that they were writing were bipartisan supported. There were so many voices for change. I was so excited. It looked like vulnerable adults finally had legislative advocates. And I finally got to tell my mother's story to the Minnesota Senate and the House Committees on Aging and Long-Term Care. It was just a slice. I had 3 minutes time to share just a tiny slice, but to also speak to the need for systemic reform and to support the task force recommendations. Other testifiers that day spoke of abuse, horrific abuse, that left their loved ones injured, maimed, retaliated against, and in one case, undiscovered for 3 days after she had died. Yet her daily well checks that were guaranteed, had been promised at least, had been checked off as if she had been okay. I'd love to report that in the 2018 bill supporting these task force recommendations were given hearings, that they were debated and amended and passed. No, unfortunately, as many of you know, these bills were never given the opportunity to be heard in committee, and they died. It was a sad civics lesson for me, how the democratic process can be stymied by a few people in power. I watched as paid industry lobbyists pushed back against proposed legislation that would have required the licensure of assisted living. I listened as a committee chair, echoed the industry lobbyists by blaming abuse on a few bad actors. Minimized were the 400 plus new complaints that just kept coming in every week. And I was heartsick during the last hours of the legislative session. I watched as the chair of the Senate Aging and Long-Term Care Committee plucked down a watered-down elder care article in a 989-page doomed omnibus package. So I picked up my pen again. This time I submitted an opinion to the Minneapolis Star Tribune. You may have picked up a copy on your way in. As I stated in my op-ed, Mom is dead. So my elder care concerns are no longer about her. They're about everybody else. Those who will need care and those who will provide it. And that will include most of us. 1 out of 2 people is predicted to have severe memory issues, dementia, by the time they reach 85. We are all going to be touched by this disease in one way or another. And sadly, the concerns I had about nursing homes back in 2006, because of shifting demographics, have now filtered down to assisted livings, to memory care. And what's the scary reality is that we still don't have licensure for those facilities. So that's my story. It's been quite a learning curve for me. But I renew my commitment every time I receive a Department of Health notification that resolved complaints have been posted on their website. The last one was March 12th, a week ago, that I looked at it. Actually, I received another one today. I just haven't had time to look at it. But last week, there were 8 substantiated complaints, and let me summarize them very quickly for you. 1, neglect, plan of care not followed, resulting in respiratory distress and death 30 minutes later. Financial exploitation, stolen checks. Neglect, care plan was not followed, had to do with repositioning and the injuries that resulted. Exploitation, narcotics stolen at an assisted living. Physical abuse on a facility's memory care floor. Emotional abuse in an assisted living. Neglect, where there was failure to assess for pain and after a hip fracture. And exploitation, where meds were stolen from several clients in an assisted living. There is much work to be done, and I hope we can do it soon. And with that, I'm going to turn the podium over to Jean.
Jacqueline, I just have one question. How can you get on that email list to get that information?
If you go to the Department of Health, and you'll see on one of the handouts, it's got a dementia information on one side, and the other side, it's got some websites.
Yes.
And the Department of Health website is there. If you go onto the Department of Health website and you look at complaints, there should be a space for you to, a place where they say, do you want the updates? And you can get them. And there's also the dashboard, which is a new recording system. So if you can't go into the dashboard, and I know there is one place right there. But I've been looking at these for years, and it's not getting any better.
My mom's name was Jackie.
Oh.
And I don't know how all of you feel, but your mother was an educator.
Use the mic.
Oh, your mother was an educator. You're an educator. Her gift to you was what you gave everyone today. So she's watching over you, and I'm so proud. And that's how I feel about all of our loved ones who have guided us on this journey to effect change for other people whose families and loved ones have experienced elder abuse and neglect. Jackie was so thorough, and I have to tell you, I'm sort of an abstract, random kind of person, which led me to forget my clipboard. I worked all day on it today, my presentation. So, but let me share with you how Elder Voice got started. And then I will talk to you about what is going on at the legislature today and what we are working for. I do have to mention, Debbie Singer is in the back. She's one of the members of Elder Voice Family Advocates, and it was her mother that was left not to be found for a few days. Jackie's mother was an educator and gave that gift to her. My mom was Irish and sort of gave that sassiness to me. And I'm as mentioned in the introduction, I'm a nurse practitioner, and a former forensic nurse. Elder Voice Family Advocates was founded 2.5 years ago after Susie Scheller, an elder abuse attorney, and I had a conversation about the need for families to share their experiences of pain and heartache following the abuse of a loved one. It's not easy, as Jackie says about singing solo, it's not easy to talk about this, because everyone has someone yet that they know that's been in the facility. And you start to think and you go, oh my gosh, I thought they were cared for. Did I put my mom in the right place? Is she okay? Has she been okay? What could I have done differently? Let me share with you how the stars aligned to begin the path that Elder Voice Family Advocates is on today. Our family made the decision to share our story of our mom with Chris Sears, that excellent reporter from the Star Tribune. We shared with him one video of my mom being abused and neglected after I installed a camera. And I have to tell you, I waited a month before I put the camera in my mom's room because I was afraid of retaliation. I had found my mother in her room at 10 o'clock in the morning with green permanent marker on her eyebrows still in bed on my birthday. But first, I had to walk through the staff on a Saturday morning. As Jackie mentioned, weekends are the worst. I thought it was an upset resident, but it was a staff fight taking place in front of all the other residents who were out in the lounge area. I contacted the facility afterwards and I said, I broke up a staff fight and Mom had green permanent marker on her eyebrows. Well, my mom always got ready for my dad. When he came home from work, she had a martini, lipstick, and eyebrows painted on. And somehow the green permanent marker had gotten into her makeup case. And she'd done it herself. But the thing is that nobody provided the cares the night before, 5 o'clock after that. If they would have seen it and washed her face. They didn't provide the cares in the morning. That's how I knew something was amiss. And I walk into this staff fight. I go to the nurse, and she says, well, who was it? And I go, well, it was everybody fighting in front of the residents. Well, who was it? And I said, I don't know, and truthfully, I'm a little nervous about telling you who might have been involved. I'm afraid of retaliation for my mom. She goes, well, I'll just look on the facility's camera. They have cameras in the hallways. And I thought, what? Well, I'm going to put cameras in my mom's room. I'm going to find out what's going on because she had missed meals. She said somebody was sleeping at the end of her bed. She said her arms hurt. She said that one caregiver was a bitch, and that wasn't my mom. So we shared this story and the video of one incident of my mom's abuse. My mom died from a urinary tract infection, or I should say 3. She was left after the facility left her 3 different times over a 3-week period, 16, 18, 19 hours. No food, water, depends changed. These were on the weekends, these were on Thanksgiving, and we had not monitored the camera. My sister had Mom to her house for Thanksgiving and put her into bed to rest at 5:30 in the afternoon, and she found her the next morning at 9 o'clock. Same clothes, same everything. Okay, so the story was shared. And after that, there was a legislator that, part of the story was that how I used a camera to catch the abuse. A legislator proposed a law on electronic monitoring. Well, that just didn't get passed. There was a big committee where 16 members, I was the only public member. That's where I met Susie Scheller. Susie and I had a conversation where she said, don't you think family members need a place to talk? I go, yeah, that's a really good idea. We should just have other members who have had this experience sit together, because you can't really share it with people that don't know. There's just... So we started that first meeting with 5 people. Susie, me, my sister, another friend, and two other women. Today, Elder Voice Family Advocates, 2.5 years later, is 200 members strong. I'm very proud of that. At the same time, this tells you that this abuse situation is prevalent, and real change and reform is needed. After the first few meetings that we had, Chris Summer, who is now our president and not here tonight, I'm in her place, a former lobbyist, the former first female board chair of Super Value, joined our group. Her dad was left a week without being noticed by the facility. Newspapers piling up. He did go to dinner. They promised that he would have a "Are you okay?" check, which never happened. And we got to work with Chris's help. We would probably be just sitting around, probably talking about how angry we are at the facilities if it weren't for Chris. She has really, she really knew what was needed for real reform. She got all of us to talk to our legislators. And one of the legislators that my sister and another member talked to was their very own Senator Scott Dibble, who said, let's do an audit. And this is where we had our audit idea come from. You should know that the, well, I'll keep going on with how all the stars came together. In November of 17, the Star Tribune came out with the Left to Suffer series. And then after that, Governor Dayton formed the elder abuse working group. This was a consumer-only work group. No industry was on this. They had, truthful, they'd run the show for decades. And there'd never been a group of consumers that had said, enough, what's going on, we need to change things. In December, following the formation of the work group, the legislative auditor came to a Minnesota Department of Health hearing. This was the first time they'd presented data before the audit was complete. They were so afraid of the abuse and neglect and harm that was occurring as they went through all the information that they could gather from the Minnesota Department of Health. They felt they needed to alert the legislature of this. And then, as you know, Governor Dayton formed that work group. We worked on it, and when we had both the House and the Senate of the same party that didn't really understand how dire things were and had only been hearing information from lobbyists for all those years, this change was difficult. The bill was never heard by itself. And I don't know about you, Jackie, but some of those meetings that I sat in on the House of Representatives, where they would take our bill that we were working for licensure and for protection, and they would push it till it was supposed to be heard at 1:30 in the afternoon, and then suddenly we're back on the docket at 8 o'clock at night, and making us wait. We had some advocates in wheelchairs that waited and waited and waited to have their story told. It's a new day. We are going somewhere. This year we are going to have assisted living licensure. What that is going to look like is a big discussion that is currently going on. I will say last week that all the members of that who have been at the table last year have been in meetings 4 or 5 hours a day trying to work through what they want in their bill. Let me tell you what we want. And that's House File 90. Senator Dibble helped us, and we have a coalition now with Elder Voice Family Advocates because we can't do this alone. We're working, we're people, we're volunteers, we're not getting paid. So together with AARP and legal aid, we are working for licensing, increased safety. As a nurse, I have to tell you, and these are, I'm sort of a fact thing, safety person when it comes to nursing. Currently, the laws in the assisted living facilities for the aides, they're hired and they have 160 hours of after hire to complete the required 8-hour training. So, and most of these trainings are now computerized. It's no hands-on. No hands-on. I tell the story about how I kept having to remake those hospital corners when I was in nursing school and remake them until I knew how to do it. And how can you care for someone with dementia and maybe some outbursts, or recognize that they're wandering at night is maybe, has anybody checked to see if they've had a urinary tract infection? Ask them if it hurts when they urinate. This really bothers me, especially when you take those 160 hours and 40% of our nationally workers, healthcare workers today are on public assistance because they're hired at low wage and part-time. They can't do it. We're asking for cameras. Well, this has been politicized too, because I had to look. Minnesota is a one-party consent state. You want to put in a camera? You can put in a camera and you don't have to tell anybody. But the fight now is, so these facilities where you're paying $6,000, $7,000, $10,000 a month for care have to be notified. They want to know who has a camera so that maybe, and think about it, when they're so short-staffed, the person that has the camera is going to get the care. The person that doesn't have a camera is not going to get the care. It's wrong. It's wrong. I have another fact for you, because I'll just keep going on this. Guess how many staff per person in assisted living facilities are required by the state of Minnesota? Well, I'll tell you. It's one awake person in the building. One awake person in the building. You see these beautiful assisted living facilities going up? One person. 40% of the people in those facilities have dementia. Some form of dementia at some stage. And that's fine, they need help. On some days, not every day, that's just the pattern of memory loss, and that's wrong. And then I'll tell you another one. Sitting in on one of those meetings, and it's like, well, let's talk about staffing. Well, it's too hard to get staff. Well, if you pay them a little better and don't take so much profit, then maybe we can have more staff. That's my belief. So we're talking, and they're saying, okay, we'll say one aide has to be in the memory care unit, in the locked memory care unit. Currently, there's no requirement, because that one person can be up in assisted living and the locked memory care unit with all these individuals has nobody. Has nobody. So this is what we're fighting for. The other thing that's coming up in the assisted living licensure bill is physical plant safety, which I don't care much about, except I would like some umbrellas out on the patios when it's hot and maybe your temperature isn't as regulated, and you just let people sit out there and bake in the sun. We have had, and I'm sure you've read about that, death due to dehydration by sitting outside. We're really working on training the staff, hands-on. Jackie mentioned that last week, one of the Office of Health Facility complaints that came through was death by suffocation. Well, if anybody read the story in the Star Tribune, it was an LPN who was doing trach care on an attorney who helped a lot of people. It was his last step in this facility before he got to go home. She capped the trach. She capped the trach and left the room. It's awful. He died. It was the last step to going home. We need better training. And we're having report cards. That'll be down the road. We were going to have a report card in 2015, but then the powers that be didn't really want it, meaning the industry, didn't want a Yelp-like setting where you and I can go, oh, don't go there, that's bad. They wanted everything very measured, but I will tell you that Elder Voice Family Advocates today, and Debbie has been back there, has been instrumental in putting it together. We have a gerontologist within our group that has compiled data that I believe that the MDH, well, they have it, but they just don't have the staff to put it all together. But Elder Voice Family Advocates is spending their time doing that. So, House File 90, MDH has put up their own, I guess it's their bill, but it's not out there, and it's fantastic. Commissioner Malcolm has listened to, it's mostly fantastic, has listened to us, family members. And the things that are in there that are just sort of like, as my sister says, not puddinhead. These facilities now are going to be surveyed every year instead of every 3 years. Did you know that we only survey every 3 years? Debbie's a veterinarian, she'll tell you that boarding kennels get surveyed more often than our private pay assisted living. What else is going on? The fines. Every time something happened and the department knew about it, they always gave the facility a chance to correct. You dropped the person from a lift, he fell on the floor and broke his hip. Well, your plan of correction is you're telling me you're not going to do it again? Okay. So I come back as the department to check, to make sure that you're not going to do it again 3 months later, and you don't get a fine. Now we're immediate fines. You get a fine and it's going to be more than what it has been, which are fines for leaving your ice house out was more than some of the fines that these facilities were getting. Is there anything else? Elder Voice Family Advocates, I believe our website is on the back of one of the handouts. If you'd like to join us, please, we need your voices, and it can be just as little as contacting a legislator and leaving an email and saying, this is what I'm thinking. I need your help. Elder Voice needs your help. We want this. I like this, or it can be writing letters. It can be going to just visit somebody that is in a facility. Take a moment to do that too. We're all family members and part of a big group that's hoping to get bigger to make a real difference in the lives of people. So thank you.
So Claire's
Debbie, do you want to come up and answer questions? Come on. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question on your bill, House File 9. Do you have funding attached to that bill?
Oh, I forgot to mention. Governor Walz gave us a lot of money before we found out we didn't have as much money as we thought we did in the surplus. We'll see how that looks, but yes, he gave huge amounts of money to fix things.
So House File 90, is there a Senate version?
The Senate